As you are on this conscious journey of self-realization, of fulfillment, of personal satisfaction from the spiritual aspects and knowledge and teachings, you must understand how to balance the consciousness and ego and to deal with the inner turmoils or inner conflicts that we often experience throughout our lives. And keep in mind that all the things that we experience that appears to be on the outside of us, responsibilities, bills, relationships, jobs, things of that nature, they're all expressions of what's going on within. They're all expressions of you dealing with the conflict within you between your consciousness and your ego. Now, understand, consciousness is the purest aspect of who you are. It is the part of you that identifies and understands the oneness of all things. It is that which is the individualized expression of what we often call God, grand intelligence, infinite intelligence, the source, universe, whatever it is that you decide to identify and call it. That is what you are, right? What we often call the I am. Whereas on the other spectrum of this very essence is your ego. And that part of you is the part of you that creates a separation or tries to create a separation between you and all other things. Now, we know that separation is a false reality, right? It is based on an illusion that you are separate and different from other people. And that is a mechanism that was created in this physical realm in order to protect ourselves and live this physical life as long as humanly possible. Now, we on this spiritual journey understands that there is this sense, this understanding that the ego is what's causing all of the suffering and the pain that we are experiencing in our lives. And instead of, like a lot of people teach, is quote unquote killing the ego, which you cannot do, you must understand the ego. You must manage the ego. And when you manage the ego, you learn to pacify, you learn to balance this conflict that is between your ego and resisting this oneness that you know to be the truth. So you have the ego, which we often identify with initially before we get on this conscious spiritual journey. And then when you recognize that something isn't right throughout our lives and within, you see through teaching, learning, and the process of self-awareness and mindfulness that the ego is in fact the thing causing you the suffering and the trouble, not anything else or anyone else. And so as you recognize this path of understanding that it is consciousness that is your purest self, you begin to acknowledge the mask that is ego. You see, the ego is in fact a mask. It can be a mask that you understand symbolically. It can also be a mask that you understand physically. The ego literally is a thing that allows you to identify yourself as a man, a woman, a person of color, right? Even your sexual orientation, your religion, all the things that you can actually list down and say, this is who you are. But in fact, that is not who you are. That is just an expression of how you live and how you identify throughout life to essentially get some understanding as to the core of who you are. But you will find that the more you identify with those things which you believe yourself to be, the further you get from the core of who you truly are. Now, it's okay to acknowledge that those things resonate with you, right? Your experiences, the way you've lived your life, how you view things and feel is important and what's not important. Those things are valid, but they are not the core of who you are. And when you acknowledge that and you begin to lighten up the load of the seriousness behind these things, and you understand the core of who you are, then you truly can relieve the suffering. Then you pacify the conflict that is within you. So understand that it is this mask that you must let go of, right? And though, yes, you may still acknowledge the mask and you may wear this mask, right? Because really we don't have a choice, right? I cannot take off my gender, my skin color, my history, my background, my, morals, and all the things that were given to me as a child, right? The programs, the subconscious thoughts and beliefs. Like I can reprogram those things, but ultimately those things kind of direct how I view and see the world. And so when I acknowledge that those things are not necessarily the core of who I am, but yet there are a level of who I am, then I can go deeper, right, by identifying consciousness and using that to bring to light or bring to the surface, right, to the mask level of recognizing that, all right, these things are a part of the experience of this life. But I can use these things by way of consciousness to direct and walk the path that is truly resonating with my consciousness, with the core of who I am. And that is where we get into purpose, fulfillment, passion, talents, things of that nature. So you have to recognize the conflict that you are experiencing, which is often a symptom of or often something that expresses itself as depression, sadness, boredom, anxiety, all these different emotions, feelings, thoughts. Those are expressions of you acknowledging and identifying completely with the ego. And when you let go of understanding or the identity of the ego, and you let go of recognizing that this thing that you are calling self is in fact a mask. And it is a mask that is allowing you to, yes, walk through this life and experience life from a particular point of view, but you get to be empowered and decide what kind of point of view you're going to have. You can have the point of view of thinking that this mask is you, right? Which will express and will set the tone for you to experience suffering and pain. And, you're going to have some good times as well, but ultimately attachment. And when we are attached to particular things, particular events, particular situations, then we often find ourselves disappointed because we have expectations, we have things like doubt, insecurities, all the things that come up that are attached, so to speak, into having this identity with the ego. But when we recognize that it is simply a mask and it is not who you really are, then you are leaning into understanding consciousness. And so when you understand consciousness, you recognize that this is a mask in order for you to play this game of life, right? It's like being in a festival where everybody is wearing a mask. That is part of the game. That is part of the experience. You are living and experiencing this parade of life, right? This festival of life by way of this mask. But you are not the mask. You are simply observing your experience within the mask. So be mindful when you are dealing with conflict and personal emotions that are negative, and you understand you have negative mindsets and paradigms. When you start to see that something isn't right and in alignment with happiness and joy, right? Then you must recognize that, okay, there is something that I have to look within and find and understand. And you can only look within when you recognize that everything is an expression of you being attached to this outside appearance, right? This outside, and I'm not just talking about the physical outside appearance. I'm just talking about the things that is more shallow as far as who you are, right? Your background, your upbringing, your religion even. Those are very shallow when you compare it to the core, the essence of your beingness. And when you get down to that core and you understand your core and who you are, then all those things, like I said before, tend to let go of its seriousness and become lighter. They become lighter, you become more open-minded, your consciousness is allowed to expand and express itself, and thus take you along the path of fulfillment and happiness and joy, whereas before, you are still on the path when you are following your ego, but that path is weighed down, right, with shame, guilt, anger, frustration, depression, all those things that we do not want to experience all the time. And so in order for you to deal with this conflict, you must acknowledge that though the ego is a part of this experience here in this world, it is not who you are. So you have to recognize that the ego is simply a mask. It is an illusion. And when you understand that illusion and you get behind the mask, then you are dealing with consciousness, which is the purest aspect of who you are. Then you can walk through this festival celebrating, happy, joyful, and ultimately living the life that you truly want to live. Thank you so much. Feel free to go to dr.abundant.com, subscribe to my daily newsletter, and I invite you to join my Conscious Creator Circle. It's a paid subscription which would allow you to get deeper into these topics, creating a space for you to be safe, to recognize the things, the difference between consciousness and ego and all the other aspects and levels of who you are, and essentially learn to be a conscious creator and create the reality that you want. Continue to join me on this journey. Peace and abundance always.